We are live.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Catch Lift Coaches Corner. I'm Tyler Gant, and I'm joined by Melissa Luke, Catch Lift lead coach.
Thanks, Tyler. This week we are so excited to welcome to the podcast U.S. Marine Corps veteran Kirsty Ennis. Kirsty, thank you for being here with us. Welcome. And could you start by telling everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me. I'm absolutely honored and stoked to be on. But yeah, I served 6 years in the United States Marine Corps as a helicopter door gunner and airframes mechanic. I've joined at a very young age. I joined at 17 and ended up doing two deployments, one with Heavy Marine Helicopter Squadron 465 and one with Heavy Marine Helicopter Squadron 362. And on that second deployment to Afghanistan, while manning the left door gun, I was involved in a helicopter crash. And as a result of the crash, I sustained some pretty severe injuries, everything from a traumatic brain injury, injuries that resulted in the loss of my left leg above the knee, fractures to my cervical spine, damage to my arms, my ears, my eyes, the list kind of goes on. And in 2012, when they sent me back stateside, I was really hell bent on staying in the Marine Corps. And I fought the whole medical board process for a while, and in May of 2014, I ended up being medically retired. And in that moment, I struggled with just repurposing myself and really figuring out how I was going to continue living this life of service beyond the military service. And that's ultimately when I decided to kind of starve the ego, turn to the outdoors, and turn to sports. And since my military service, I think I've gone on to, I don't know, be of greater service to the public and disabled populations by doing what I'm doing now with my foundation. Obviously being an ambassador to other foundations, and really just trying to inspire people to overcome whatever adversities they might be facing. So I've closed the chapter on being a Marine for sure, but I've also used that and what I learned there to be able to write the rest of my book. So
It's amazing.
That's awesome. Thank you so much,
I,
Kirsty, for sharing that with us.
Ironically enough, I think I have your unit patch on my desk. Is that it?
okay, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I had a friend that was in the same squadron like 2 years ago. So out there at
Very cool.
Miramar. Yeah. So
Yep,
you do a lot of mountain climbing, yeah.
I do. Yep.
So what's the biggest mountain you've climbed?
Well, so I was actually on Everest in April and May of last year, and that's definitely been the tallest that I've been
Yikes!
on. But I've gone, yeah, gone all over really. I've been trying to do what's called the seven summits, so the highest peak on each of the seven continents.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Nice.
I mean, I'm originally from Florida, so when I got involved in mountain sports, it was obviously like the irony was pretty great in all of it for sure.
So is that like your fitness focus is strictly mountain climbing for like your personal focus?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to an extent. For me, so since I've been an above the knee amputee, gosh, only since 2015, a lot of what I do athletically is really just me trying to be, well, trying to figure out how I can continue living my life, kind of exploring and, regaining and rebuilding confidence that I can go out and do whatever, I want to on this one leg of mine. So a lot of what I do, again, in sports or athletically really does have this very, um, I don't know. There's a deeper purpose to all of it for sure. Like
Hmm.
it's very functional in all of it. But I will say, like, mountaineering came into my life really because it was just this reminder of my independence and my resiliency. Because it's always one step further. And like, I love team sports. I was competing in snowboarding for a long time, and there's a lot of camaraderie and stuff like that. But for me, like, in the mountains, it's the weight of the world on your shoulders. Like, no one can do that for you. And I think that's what's so powerful about it. So yeah, that's my main focus, I guess. But there's a lot, I guess, intertwined
That's
going on behind the
awesome.
scenes.
Very cool. So, what was your, when you first started, what was your first climb, or really, that what was your first either climb or kind of first mountain climb that, really made you think, I want to keep with this, this isn't just kind of a splash in the pan for me, like this is a real passion.
Yeah. So honestly, when I got into mountaineering, I had no idea like where it was going to lead me. So I had a surgery in November of 2016, and ultimately that robbed me of, that snowboarding season and being able to compete. And that was like my recovery has just been this emotional roller coaster. One day I'm at a really high, and then, later on down the road, I'm rock bottom low. And so when this last surgery came into my life, I don't know. I just really struggled and suffered. And I knew that if I couldn't snowboard, really rely on that outlet and that release and that therapy at that time, that I needed to find something else. So I decided that I was going to climb the highest point in Africa 4 months after that last amputation. And when I got out there, of course, there's a little bit of training, but my wounds were fresh, stitches, scar lines, the whole nine. But it was like I just kind of flung myself into it. And then after I got out there, I realized that I really liked like this sounds bad, but like the struggling and suffering aspect of it, because it made everything that much sweeter when you got to the top. And then I was also like climbing in support of this nonprofit called the Water Boys, and it was to raise raise money for clean water for the East Tanzanians. And in doing all of this, we ended up raising about $150,000. So
Wow.
for
Wow,
me,
that's
mountaineering
amazing.
quickly became this thing that, yeah, yeah, thanks. Quickly became this thing that I could challenge myself mentally, physically, and emotionally, but it could also offer that platform for me to continue to serve, for me to pay it forward and give back to different groups of people. And so, honestly, for lack of better terms, that's what lit a fire under my ass as I realized that I could use, these mountains as something else. It could really be my purpose.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you've wrote a book. We want to talk a little bit on your book.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not out yet, and I can't tell you guys the name yet, but definitely over the next few months, be on the lookout for it. It's something that it's very gritty, it's very vulnerable, and it's something that I'm just proud to be able to share all of this with everyone. I do think that our military service and obviously the recoveries there's a lot of value in sharing those stories to the public.
Mm-hmm.
People who may not have experienced the same things that we have. But I feel like one of the things that we do a really good job of covering is just being able to overcome, being able to take something negative, and pull out whatever positivity that you can from it. So I'll definitely be sure to like circulate the rest of that with you guys as it's out. And then I also have a documentary of the Everest climb coming out as well.
Oh wow,
So
that's
Very
going
be
to
on the
be
cool.
lookout for
great.
that.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
A lot of
Yeah.
lot of
Thanks.
good content. I'm sure that book's going to be one hell of a read too. Talking about your story
Thank
and
you.
all that. So, um, one of the things like when you're talking about mountaineering and just doing even any type of competitions at any type of altitude, you have to train for the altitude. How do you go about preparing yourself for the change in altitude when you're climbing?
Well, I think a lot of, well, and just like any, whether it's an endurance, sport or, strength, whatever it is, like it just takes time in the saddle, and it takes
Mm-hmm.
patience, and it takes listening to your body to be able to figure out how you are going to react. And then once you figure out what that's actually going to look like, how you're going to navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like especially in in typical years, like last year, my climbs, I would come home from a climb and I would give myself 6 weeks to kind of regroup and then start training again, and I would leave. So for me, it was just like never really letting myself get out of mountain shape, if you will,
Yeah.
but then also just staying current enough with the training to know like, okay, over the last 6 months, this is how my body's changed, and this is how like it's going to react to altitude now. So I wish there was like this crazy strategy for it, but it's really just trial and error and being able to put yourself in these situations, stay calm, stay patient, and really work your way through it to find what's going to work for you.
Do you journal any of that? Like, do you keep a training log to keep up with that? Because you have a pretty quick turnover. I mean, if you're doing a climb and you're coming back and 6 weeks later you're heading out for another one, like how do you keep track of that? And how do you mitigate like the minor injuries or keep going with because you've got to get minor injuries on almost every climb.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, so yes, I write everything down now. I mean, even if it's something like, hey, on last Monday I felt really good. My body did this. I drank this much. Like literally every single detail, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, I write it down. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this crazy detailed thing, but to be able to say, hey, 2 weeks ago I felt like this. What was the changes that I made to feel better now? So I log all of that. And then, yeah, a lot of like the rest of it, Melissa knows because I reached out to everybody at Cal to try and figure out the nutrition side of things. And again, like it's not something that's going to happen overnight, just like with any sport. It's something that you will have to take the time to work through to figure out what works for you. So for everybody, regardless of what sport you're involved in, I suggest writing everything down, just to give yourself like this frame of reference and to see what you could be doing better today, that you were doing months ago or even years ago. So
It's definitely always an endurance
absolutely.
race, not a sprint. So
Yeah,
that's
I love that you said, how you write everything down like that. And even, stuff that to a lot of people might seem inconsequential, like, I feel better today. Well, what made me feel better? Like, that's so important. And to be able to identify those things, that have, either helped recovery, hurt recovery, or, kind of where you're at. So that's definitely fantastic. Why don't we talk, for a minute, Kirsty? You brought up like the nutrition piece. And, you know, before I started talking to you a couple years ago, this was just never something that even occurred to me that, as a mountain climber, that you would deal with. Like, hey, I need to mass. I know when I'm going to go and climb a mountain, I'm going to lose a certain amount of weight. Can you talk to us a little bit kind of just about that and what actually is happening to your body? I mean, you're going into extreme conditions, kind of the whole thing. What do you anticipate to happen on the mountain weight wise? How do you prepare for that? What's that look like?
yeah. Well, so like every mountain is so different, whether that's altitude, weather, predictability, your supplies, all of that, like even what your team will look like. But for like a lot of the bigger mountains, like strictly at altitude, I mean, obviously you're depleting your body of oxygen. And the easiest way to explain what's happening is everything's so restricted that, I mean, your body essentially starts to eat itself because it's looking for energy. So a lot of people, like, they have to take diuretics just to be able to move oxygen up at altitude and stuff. So a lot of that, like, especially Everest, when you're up there for 2 months, I withered away. I came home 25 pounds lighter than I am right now. And I mean, I looked sickly. And so, but in other times too. So when I was on Denali in 2018, the highest point in North America, on Everest, you can have Sherpas and you can have teams to help you like move supplies around and whatnot. But with Denali, it's a part of the National Park Service. So you can't have people help you carry weight. So all of your food, all of your nutrition has to go on your back or in a sled. So in times like that, you're looking to cut weight anywhere. And so oftentimes, your healthier foods, the things that your body really needs, you're not going to get that, in freeze dried meals or,
Right.
pastas or, dried anything. So those are like some of the big things that you have to be able to really sit down and map out, where are you going to get the things that your body actually needs. So yeah, I mean, altitude is one thing, but then also just the accessibility of some of the things that we're used to back home. You definitely don't have it out there.
Yeah. Wow. I know I've seen like,
is
I was just gonna say, I know I've seen some crazy pictures before, like you've posted like on Instagram, preparing for a climb, and everything laid out like that. And it's really something to see, because I mean, to think about that, the meticulous nature that you need to, put on that mission that you're going to go off in, you know, does it feel like you're getting ready? Does it feel like a mission, or does it kind of like you're getting ready, when we were in the military and went on a mission, or does it feel completely separate from that now, that preparation and that anticipation?
No, it totally goes hand in hand. Like it makes me laugh because, every time that we would do a gear check in the military, it was you laid all your stuff out, you packed it back up, you took it back out, you like
Yep.
checked and rechecked and marked it off the list 10 times over.
SL3 to the
Uh,
max.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so that's what I do now. And you really do have, I mean, you have to think of it the same way. Am I going to Afghanistan? Absolutely not. Am I planning for things like combat or war, any of that, like military operations, not in the slightest. But what I am planning for is still, I mean, people die on these mountains. And if you don't have something that's critical to safety or rescue or any of that, like you will die, or even just med kits and the whole nine, having the appropriate gear. I mean, It really, it's not like you can get that stuff on the mountain. Once you're up there, it is you and your team, and you're facing every element that that mountain can throw at you. So you have to be prepared, and you have to think things through 10 times over, worst case scenarios. Obviously prepare for the worst, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely go into it with that kind of mindset.
Yeah, because if you make a mistake at the bottom, halfway up, that mistake stands. You can't change it.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
it's definitely that's definitely got to be nerve wracking. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I think I'm down to try a lot of stuff, but mountain peaks. I don't know if I think I'll put that on my list. I don't know. That's what, like, when Julian Torres was telling me about his K2 climb, I was like, man, you did that with no legs. I don't think I would ever even attempt that able bodied or, anything. It's just, if you tumble down it, you're done. I don't know. It's crazy to me. So, like, what's your training look like? Like, coming up to a climb. I know, like, so in strongman, you have a block 12, 16 week training block, and then you peak getting close to a competition. How does that look for you?
Honestly, like with mountaineering, it's just consistency. Like
Yeah.
there really isn't any of this kind of like build up. I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. It's all a build up. You want to be as strong and as stupid as possible when you go
Yeah.
into these climbs. Like you don't want to like dwindle anything down towards the end. Like don't get me wrong, a few days out, you might let your body rest before yourself, throw yourself into it.
Hmm.
But it really is building blocks. And there's so much strength and conditioning and just again that time in the saddle. So for me, we try to simulate like what my heart's going to do at altitude. So just any kind of interval training. I'll go
Okay.
outside and I'll get my heart rate up to a certain point with a weighted pack and just a hill for a while and do that for an hour a day, and then just get out and be able to hike for an hour a day to be able to build the core muscles that I normally use on the mountain.
Yeah.
What I use daily is certainly not what I use in the mountains. Like if you've ever seen me hike, it's literally like doing a right leg lunge over and over and over again
Oh,
and like tricep dips.
Oh,
Like,
that's
it is crazy. So for me, yeah. So for me, like for 6 weeks, like if I might let my body recover from this climb, all like I'm not using those muscles over and over. So at a
right.
certain point, it's like, okay, I have to switch that back
yep.
on and just get those as strong as possible. Because especially like we were just talking about at altitude, that's all going to disappear over time. Like especially if you're doing one of these 6 to 8 week climbs,
Hmm.
it's going to disappear and it's going to disappear fast. Like I mean, you're just so exhausted and there's nothing left to you by the
Yeah.
end.
Oh
So,
man.
I mean,
Yeah.
I pack on as much muscle, and quite frankly, I'm just kind of a trash can right before leading up to it. I just try
Yeah.
to put on as much as possible.
And so, do you restrict airflow ever, like in training, like with masks or anything like that for altitude training, or do you just do
No, I
it
mean, I
based
try to
off
simulate
strictly heart rate?
strictly heart rate. Yeah. So I
Oh,
mean, for a little while, I was kind of intrigued by the altitude masks and whatnot. But the more time that I spent in the mountains and actually doing these climbs, the more I realized it's really just important to be able to control your heart rate, be able to regulate it, figure
yeah.
out when, how long you can hit those spikes for, and then when it's realistic to bring it back down. So, and out there, like there's nothing to compare to that. Like for me, like you might be breathing deep or you might like try to regulate your breathing in some way, shape, or form, but there are so many other elements that are taking over that I don't think a mask would even be able to like scratch the surface on what's going on. So
Are there any
yeah.
Okay.
type of like breathing exercises that you do like when you're home, or is there any type of specific breath work that you do train?
Yes, actually. So I mean, honestly, any kind of just breathing that they do in yoga, whether it's a slow inhale and slow exhale, inhale for 5, hold for 5, exhale for 5, like that is gold on the mountain. And that's just because a lot of people start to hyperventilate and panic on the mountain because again, you are struggling and just going through so much mentally and emotionally that, on top of that, you feel like you can't breathe. So to be able to regulate that and just calm everything back down is crucial. But then also just to be able to like truly get in a full deep breath, get the good blood moving around, and then to get it all back out because out there you want to be like, you really want to have just this short, very quick paced breath. And that's just not practical. I mean, that's how people wear themselves out, and that's when people get hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with each climb and each training session, and really when you're talking about somebody that's an amputee in daily life, normal daily life, pain is a big thing. So how do you deal with that? Is it just a mental thing for you, day to day, or what?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to that. One, really understanding your pain threshold. So for me, I have a ridiculously high pain tolerance, but I've also taken the time to figure out, okay, well, I can identify, is this nerve pain? Is this just overuse? Is this exhaustion? I've been able to kind of pinpoint those things and what's working for me and what's not working for me. The other part of it is just kind of that mental strength, to be able to recognize and live with pain, not let it totally consume you, and say, hey, I can
Yeah,
walk alongside this. I have strategies and techniques to be able to bear with it, if you will. But on the flip side of that, again, you can't really throw yourself into these situations without knowing that you have the proper gear that's going to work for you. Like, just with technical climbing gear, whether that's, a harness or your boots or your crampons, whatever it is, if that's going to cause you pain, it's going to cause you a world of other problems in other places and cause ultimately more pain.
yeah,
So for me, like anybody dealing with this disability or a disability, you have to figure out, like, you have to dial in your prosthetics. You have to figure out what's going to work for you, um, and build from there. Because for me, what works for me may not always work for somebody else, especially if maybe they're below the knee amputee or obviously an upper limb amputee. So, yeah, I encourage anybody that if you are dealing with pain, figure out how you can navigate it, figure out your threshold, and figure out the tools that you need.
Nice.
very, very well. Yeah, that's I would imagine that you know any like any bit of equipment malfunction could cause a stoppage in the day for sure. And so do you,
Absolutely.
with like I know like prosthetics can change like the way that they fit. Do you have to? Is there like a refitting that you have to do every so often, like with either like weight fluctuations or like muscular fluctuations with how your fitment
Abs-
works?
yeah, definitely. So, I mean, any little change in your weight can change, obviously, the shape of your limb, even if it's just something like water weight.
Yeah,
When I go out and hike, my residual limbs, it's inside this socket, inside this silicone liner, like it sweats. So when I go and dump that out, my limb has now shrunk up. So now my socket doesn't want to stay on the right way. So then I'll have to have, a secondary means of suspension and kind of a backup plan to keep it on. Or, even if I were to gain 3 or 4 pounds, like the way that I sit down into that socket, or even when I put on a backpack with weight in it, the way that I sit down into it totally changes everything. So for me, I've been really, really fortunate that, in my day to day life, I don't have to
hmm,
try too terribly hard to not change my shape, lose weight or gain weight. Um, but your socket makes a world of difference. So if you do not have an appropriate, like, fitting socket, take the time to work through that and be very, very meticulous, be very calculated with it. And like you said, plan for those changes.
yeah,
Because for me at altitude, my limb, actually swells when most
yeah,
people shrink. So, like, a lot of other amputees would have to bring other sockets up with them. But for me, I will, like the leg that I'm wearing right now, same socket, same knee, same foot setup. I can go out. This is what I climbed Everest on. This exact setup. So if you have your systems dialed and you do have a prosthetist that's willing to work with you and really adapt to what your goal is, I mean, hang on to them, because I mean, that really is, like, that's what's going to determine your success, especially at altitude. But yeah, I'm actually kind of like an anomaly. So like I said, a lot of people's limbs shrink. So they'll have to have socks to, like, fatten their leg up to be able to wear their socket. And I swell, which is great because then my leg's not going anywhere. I might
yeah.
be cutting off circulation, but it's definitely not falling off.
That's got
So
to cause a little bit more pain too, just from you know but yeah, at least it's staying on, I
Yeah.
guess. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's crazy.
So we've
So
got
we. Oh yeah, you go ahead, Melissa.
so we've got a couple questions here from the live stream that we want to throw out to you, Kirsty. Matt is asking, do you do any
Yeah.
summer hikes or any winter ice climbing?
I do. So I do both. I mean, even right now, I try to hike as much as possible. Even if it's just one of the, my backyard favorites, or I have a 13,000-foot mountain right right here in my valley. So that's kind of the training go-to mountain, just to crank it out, even if it's once a month, just to make sure things are still working the way that I want them to, and to make sure that I don't lose that strength and that endurance. I also do winter ice climbing. There are some amazing organizations out there. If you're an amputee or disabled or whatever you have going on, I will be happy to share those with you guys, so that you guys can circulate them if they want some help getting involved in those sports. But I think being as versatile as possible, especially in mountaineering, is key, because you are going to come across the unthinkable. So really, like, the technical skills that I have learned in ice climbing have totally translated to glacier travel and mountaineering, or like hiking. I mean, again, that's time in the saddle. I mean, that's what builds your endurance and your strength, and that's what you need. So I mean, absolutely. Any of those things really that you can kind of pull tips and tricks from, I highly encourage, because again, it's just figuring your body out and what's going to work for you.
Nice. We want to also kind of, because I think this is something, I know we already talked about it, but it can benefit a lot of people. Kirsty, could you just kind of recap one more time for us the breathing, or if there's, we had some people bring that back up, the breathing that you talked about, the breathing exercises that you do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so my go-to, I mean, even here at home, to be able to like remind myself to reset, slow down, and work through. I mean, heck, it could just be even an argument, and
Yep.
reminding myself to think and slow down. I inhale for 5, yeah, slow 5, hold for 5, and then exhale for 5. And really, that's just to like refocus myself, recenter myself. And on the mountain, it's really just to be able to get those full, deep, valuable, breaths in and out. Because up there, it's going to be natural for you to want to hyperventilate, to do quick, short breaths. And that's the last thing you want up there. So especially anybody that, I mean, heck, even if you're at sea level and you're going to 8,000 feet on a vacation to Colorado this summer or something, really try to implement that, to focus on your breathing. Because I mean, it does. I mean, it will help immediately with any kind of headaches that you're facing with altitude sickness, even nausea. I mean, it really does. It works wonders, for all of that.
Good, thanks.
So with which we kind of talked earlier about, like, do you use like any type of oxygen mask or like restrictive mask before climbing? But so we had another question that kind of related to this, and I've heard of like MMA fighters like Diego Sanchez use this strategy before one of his biggest fights in his career. Was he used an oxygen chamber, um, in his camp coming up to the fight, and then post to recover. Do you ever do any of that for like pre climb or post climb recovery?
I don't, but one of the things that I am exploring now, is the hyperbaric chambers.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those, like, obviously, you can speed up recovery. You can um, increase some of like your healing tendencies and the likes of that nature, like you said, going into or coming out of a fight. But for me, one of the things that I'm exploring is really being able to use these chambers to be able to acclimatize quicker. So like when
Yeah.
I was on Everest, I spent 2 months out there, but really only about, gosh, 5 or 6 weeks of that was really just acclimatizing. So if I could use that chamber to acclimatize here stateside, hop on a plane,
Yeah,
get
you're
over to
ready to go.
Everest and crank out Everest in 2 weeks. That's kind of what I'm looking at. But yeah, I mean, I've heard amazing things about those. Everything from traumatic brain injuries to
Mhm.
orthopedic injuries, the whole nine. So yeah, if anybody has access to that, oh man, I definitely take up that
For
opportunity.
sure.
Yeah, capitalize on that, guys.
So I want to kind of
Absolutely.
shift us into a little bit, Kirsty, where we're talking about goal setting, because there's no way, you could have climbed these mountains without goals, your book, your foundation. How do you approach goals in your life?
I again write everything down. Because to me, like a thought's just a thought until it's on paper and then you're processing it a different way. And then for me, I have a huge problem with focusing. I'll have 30 new goals in one day, but by writing them down, yeah, it's bad. But by writing them down, I can actually like take a moment and say, well, okay, does this align with your values? By you acting on this idea or this goal, is that going to set you up for your successes later on down the road that, really are going to shape what the rest of your life are going to look like? So for me, it's like before I invest too much into it mentally or emotionally, I check myself, and I'll even, I'll reach out to friends and family who really know me, and I'll say, hey, does this sound like me? Does this sound like a good idea? Which I know that sounds kind of silly, but on one hand, it's again that checks and balance system. But on the flip side, it's an accountability thing. Because if it is a goal that I should be pursuing, then it allows somebody else to be set up to hold my foot to the fire, pun intended. Like, so for me, again, being realistic about what those goals are, and then breaking this, say it's to climb Everest. This is the goal. Then I break down that one big goal into small attainable goals because nothing's going to happen overnight. So when I have this goal of climbing a mountain, it's like, okay, well, what are your training goals going to look like? What are your nutrition goals going to look like? And then again, break that down into a weekly thing or even a daily thing, whether it's something small like a change. But I think it's important not to get too wrapped up in the one big goal, if you will, and to really break that down and to focus on the smaller attainable ones. Because yeah, those small achievements with those small goals, like that's going to be what sets you up for success. What's going to actually allow you to reach that bigger goal.
And
Yeah,
you're
you
Does
have
that
to
make
literally,
sense?
reverse.
yeah,
You
you're
have to
literally
reverse
doing that.
engineer
You're
everything.
taking that goal of I'm going to climb Mount Everest, and you're literally working backwards chunk by chunk. What does that look like in a month? What does that look like week, daily? What does that look like in your life? That's
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that's why people like I I don't mean for this to sound super negative, but like I think that's why a lot of people when they meet resistance or when they fail, they give up quickly because they made this unattainable goal because they didn't break it down. So for me, it's like when you reach these small attainable ones, like again, that's just a little nugget in your little confidence backpack. Like, okay, I can do this. I am going to be able to climb whatever mountain or open a new business or complete this, degree. But I do. I think that's when people get discouraged is when they set these unrealistic expectations of themselves and I guess underestimate the work that's actually going to go into it.
yeah. How often do you look at your goals and kind of reevaluate them, or is it something you set that goal and like you said, like it might be a day I've got 30 new goals. Like kind of how often do you kind of relook at that and what you're working for?
I honestly try to do it daily. Because one of the things that I've been really just trying to work through personally is again aligning those values. And you're not the same person, or I'm not the same person that I was when I first got hurt. So maybe some of those goals that I, set when I first got hurt, they don't even apply to my life anymore.
Mhm.
So I do think it's important to look back and say, is this relative to my life now? Is this going to make sense? Or, again, your values might even change. The things that have shaped you into who you are now, those things might be more important than anything that ever came previously, whether that's a new family, a new relationship, whatever it is. So I think it's important to look at them daily. And I also think it's important to remind yourself of those goals daily, because I'm a like huge believer in self-talk and reminding yourself, what those intentions are. No, I don't mean like the hippie intentions in meditating. I just mean like being able to say, hey, this is the life that I want. What am I doing today to be able to create that?
Do you ever struggle with like if you set this goal for yourself and then you have to reevaluate and it's say it's a goal that you were dead set on, you really wanted to get there, but it just not that it's not attainable, it just doesn't make sense for you anymore. Do you ever struggle with forcing yourself to get rid of that goal because it's just not pertinent to what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. And for me, like I'll just use the example of snowboarding. I love snowboarding. I still do it all the time.
Mhm.
But I made this goal to compete in the Winter Paralympics, and over time, it wasn't this fit for me anymore. Like the reasons that I was doing it 4 or 5 years ago aren't, it's not the reasons that I'm doing it now. And for me, it was very painful because I was very public with this goal to my friends and my family, guys and gals that I was in the military with, people on, social media, the whole nine. I was very, very vocal about it. And so for me to wind back and then have to, almost like accept defeat or that
Yeah.
failure, or have to admit that I was going to go ahead and retire that goal, that was it was uncomfortable, because
Mhm.
for me, I am, a people pleaser. I like making other people feel good, or, I like getting that pat on that back, or that just positive
Mhm.
reinforcement. So for me, I felt like I was letting a lot of people down. But when I actually stopped and shifted that perspective of, I have to live my life for me too. I have to do what's going to make the most sense for me.
Yeah.
And the people who really care about you, like those are going to be the ones that support you and say, hey, you know what, you got a new goal. What can I do to support you in getting after that? So there's a lot of different, I guess, just negative feelings that are associated with, again, having to shift gears. But I think a lot of that comes down to just being able to say, hey, I got what I needed out of this life through this goal or this experience or this opportunity my way for the time being. I gained what I needed to from it, and now it's time to close that chapter and move on. But again, I think it's about shifting that perspective. Yeah, I could sit here and I could look at that as failure, or I can look at it as opportunity.
Mhm.
I'll use an example right now, even beyond sports. I own a few small businesses in Southern California. COVID-19 hit, totally derailed things. I mean, one is a hair salon. So like the hair salon was shut down. We can't make any money. Our staff doesn't want to come back to work because they're scared. There's so many different things.
Mhm.
And so now like we're making, the decision to go ahead and, permanently close the doors and take our business model and totally change it. So for me, like that's going to look like a failure to a lot of people. Like, oh, COVID-19, like overtook everything.
Yeah.
But to me, I'm closing those doors so I can use that as a springboard to do something, even bigger and better. Or I'm taking like this really bad thing that happened, pulling what I can gain from it, using that experience, and, again, catapulting myself into something that could even hold, something bigger for my future. So I think it's important to sit with those negative emotions, but then figure out how you can turn them around.
Yeah. You
Pull
have to
pull
make
what's
the
positive.
yeah
Yeah.
make the best of a shitty situation. I mean,
That's
that's
exactly.
that's kind of like the story of the Marine Corps is like, well, how do you make this shit sandwich taste good? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's just part of it, I guess. Especially with this pandemic going on, there's probably a whole lot of that going around. I would definitely guess.
Totally.
But
So
yeah,
Kirsty, we've
so
got we've got another question here. So we're all obviously anxiously awaiting your book when it comes out, but we know we have to wait. Can you give us some other, maybe motivational books or books that, have helped you kind of on your journey?
Yes. Okay. So one is called Go Giver. Simple, just Gogiver. It is really, I mean, it's really what it is it focuses on, living a life of giving back and how that's going to come back to you tenfold. And it goes through some different principles and stuff. But I mean, it really is just this phenomenal book about obviously giving to others and what that looks like, being open to receiving, and how sometimes our greatest gifts are things that we never even asked for or never even knew that, we needed or wanted. There's another one called Essentialism, which is great for people like me, who again have an issue with focusing. It's really about being able to kind of declutter your mind, really strip away the excess. Again, focus on your goals, focus on what you need and what you need to do to get there. And then another one is actually called Get a Grip. And Get a Grip is more of like a business model. Goes through a whole story, but the things that are intertwined are things that go well beyond business. It's things that we can use in our day-to-day life to be able to be effective and to be efficient, and again, just to be able to set those goals and actually reach our goals. So yeah, those are my top three right now.
Nice, thanks.
Oh, and there's one more, The Four Agreements is a great one too.
hmm, I've
Awesome.
never heard of that one. I should probably start reading more books. Been telling myself that for a long time. Well,
What about here? We would be wrong here if we didn't ask you this. Kirsty, what advice do you have to any veterans or any listeners that either, novice mountaineers or they're thinking about getting into it? What advice do you have?
Well, so first I'll share like my mantras, if you will, like what has gotten me through the nitty gritty, terrible, dark days of everything. And the first one is it's the 6 inches between your ears and what's behind your rib cage. So in short, it's really just being able to keep your head and your heart in the right place. I mean, if you can do those two things, you can overcome absolutely anything, whether that's physically, whether that's, with your career, with your family, and relationships, friendships, the whole nine. And being able to really take a step back and slow down and say, again, asking yourself, does this align with my values? And then the other thing is, we can't control our circumstances. We can't control what this crazy, vicious world is going to throw at us. We can't control the pandemic, for example, but we can control what we make of it. So we control what our thoughts, emotions, and perspectives are. And quite frankly, the way that we feel, that's not fact. So I think one of the things that we all have to work through, whether that's again in a personal life or a professional life, civilian, veteran, is being able to say, hey, is this realistic? And is what I'm feeling right now fact? So to be able to put in these like a system of accountability, again, for your emotions and your thoughts and your perspectives. So that kind of answered the first half of that, I think. And then the second half, for anybody that like wants to get into whether it's mountaineering or just a new sport that might be totally foreign to what they're used to, again, start small, but be willing to be uncomfortable. Be willing to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. You're not going to be great at it at first. You are going to struggle. You're going to fail. You're going to suffer through pretty much all of it, especially for some of these extreme, endurance sports. But again, be patient with yourself. There's a lot to learn, but if it's something that you try a few times and you're genuinely passionate about it, I mean, I really I encourage people to commit to it. Commit to that, because for me, I had no idea that mountaineering would turn into this purpose or this passion or any of it. I did it on a whim, for crying out loud. But it's turned into so much more, and it's given my life so much meaning. So
That's so awesome.
I think that was a really, really good answer. So
Yeah.
for both of them, I don't think I could have said it better myself. But that's so true. Anytime you're talking about coming into a new sport of any type, get ready to be uncomfortable, because it's gonna be real weird at first.
Yeah.
Really weird.
yeah.
So yeah, that's for sure. Well, Kirsty, Lynn specifically asked us to let you know how eternally grateful she is for you taking some time out of your crazy schedule and sharing your thoughts and answering our questions and supporting Catch a Lift here for a few minutes out of your day. So thank you from all of us, really, for being here and sitting in the interview, for sure.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I mean, I think what Catch a Lift has really built with their community is really powerful. And not to backpedal too much, but I think that's important too when you're going into a new sport. Take the time to get to know the community, because sometimes you'll figure out that that's where you like the best friends, and again, the biggest support
Mm-hmm.
that you'll ever find is going to be right there in that community of the new sport that you're getting into. Some of the best teachers and yeah, best
That's
friends.
that's
So very
extremely true.
Yes.
So true, because there's different dynamics around every sport and the community. I mean,
Yeah.
even the closest sports like powerlifting and strongman are very, very close styles of sports, but the communities are night and day around those two.
Yeah.
Not that either one's any better than the other; they're just different. So yeah, you definitely got to submerge yourself in that and learn that beforehand. But Melissa, do you have any more questions for Kirsty?
I mean, I could sit here and talk forever
All
with you,
day.
but
All
no, I
day.
mean, no. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your message with us. Is absolutely fantastic, and again,
Yeah.
thank you from all of us. And yeah, Tyler here.
I have one more question. Do you have a roundabout date of when your book comes out for anybody listening that might want to read it?
Where I'm shooting for September 1.
Okay.
Shooting for a September one. But yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to like follow along on social media, I'm fairly easy to find, but it's pretty boring. It's just my name, Kirsty Ennis. But I'm trying to do a decent job of using that a little bit more to let everybody know what's going on. So
Awesome.
book and documentary, hopefully all said and done by the end of 2020. So
Awesome.
Cool
Very
deal.
excited to see
So
that. Yes.
everybody keep an eye out for Kirsty's book, end of the year. I'm sure that's going to be a phenomenal read. Like just reading over your website and some of your background, that's going to be a really good book. So everybody get ready for that. But everybody, that is it for this week. Thank you again, Kirsty, for being on and dealing with our questions. We'll be back next week with a U.S. Army veteran named Brody Howitt. I think I said his name right, but hey, I'm not an English major, so.
Remember, everybody, Cal Coach's Corner is not just a one-way conversation. We welcome your feedback and comments. Please leave us feedback on the YouTube stream, Facebook, Instagram. You can also reach us at Coach's Corner at catchaliftfun.com. Any veteran members on today, you're free to join us after here. If you have some more questions or want to talk to Kirsty, leave your name in the chat box and we'll send you guys an invitation.
And once again, we'd like to thank everybody at Catch Lift who's helped put this thing together. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Henry, and everybody else behind the scenes. Huge shout out and thank you to ID Technologies for being an ongoing sponsor and one of the largest supporters for the Catch a Lift Fund. Above all, we want to thank all of you for tuning in again this week and supporting Catch a Lift Fund, supporting this show as we try to do our best to make it grow. And until next week, stay Cal strong.
Stay Cal strong, guys.